Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was born as a Kryptonian besides Superman. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The last day of Krypton was a symphony of sorrow played against the violent percussion of a world's death rattle. The sky, once a familiar canvas of soft crimson under the light of its great red sun, Rao, was now bruised with shades of violet and angry orange. Deep, agonal tremors pulsed through the planet's very core, a constant reminder of the imminent, catastrophic end. The crystalline spires of Kryptonopolis, elegant structures that had pierced the heavens for millennia, groaned under the strain, their melodic chimes warped into a dissonant shriek. In a high citadel, overlooking the chaos, two families worked with a desperate, focused silence. Within the laboratory of Jor-El, a man whose mind had foreseen this apocalypse, and whose heart was breaking for it, the air was thick with unspoken grief. He and his wife, Lara Lorvan, moved with practiced grace around a small, silver ship. Inside its gel-cushioned cockpit lay their son, Kal-El, a babe with a shock of black hair and eyes that reflected the dying light of his world. Lara smoothed the red blanket emblazoned with the serpentine crest of the House of El over his small body. "He will be an outcast," she whispered, her voice catching. "They'll kill him." Jor-El placed a hand on her shoulder, his own face a mask of resolute pain. "No, my Lara. His cells will drink the radiation of the yellow sun. He will be a god to them." He leaned down, placing a hand on the cockpit's canopy, his forehead touching the cool metal. "Goodbye, my son. Our hopes and dreams travel with you." A few spires away, in a home that echoed with a similar, terrible urgency, a parallel scene unfolded. Zor-El, Jor-El's younger brother and a brilliant bioengineer, made final adjustments to a vessel of his own design. It was smaller, sleeker, its alloy a darker, more resilient gray. His wife, Alara Inze, held their infant son, Ezekiel, close to her chest, memorizing every line of his face. He was smaller than his cousin, with a wild mane of dark green-black hair and eyes the color of Krypton's lost oceans. "Is his pod ready?" Alara asked, her voice steady despite the tear that traced the path down her cheek. Zor-El nodded, his hands flying across the console. "The Phantom Drive is calibrated. The life support systems are triple redundant. I have encoded all of our family's knowledge into the command key, our history, our science, our art." He looked at his son, and for a moment, the scientist gave way to the father. "I included my research on cellular adaptation. On that new world, under their sun, he will need guidance. He will be so strong, but he must learn to be gentle." Alara kissed her son's forehead, a lingering, desperate press of her lips. She swaddled him in a matching red blanket, but his crest was different. Where Kal-El's was a simple, elegant S-like symbol, Ezekiel's was a more intricate glyph, a central diamond from which 8 lines radiated outwards, a symbol for the House of El's belief and hope spreading to all corners of the universe. She placed him gently into the pod. "Be their light, Ezekiel," she murmured, her voice a prayer. "Be their hope." From their respective launch pads, the two brothers, Jor-El and Zor-El, gave the final command. With a silent, blinding flash of energy, 2 pods shot from the dying world. They were twin streaks of light, a final, desperate message in a bottle cast into the cosmic ocean, fleeing the thunderous crescendo of a planet tearing itself apart. They traveled for an eternity and for an instant, cocooned in the silence of space, 2 lonely souls on a journey to a world that would forever change them, and which they, in turn, would forever change. Smallville, Kansas, United States. The night was quiet, the kind of deep country quiet that was more a presence than an absence of sound. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth and corn silk. Jonathan and Martha Kent were driving home in their weathered Ford pickup, the radio murmuring a forgotten country tune. It was then that the sky tore open. A streak of fire, brighter than any firework, screamed across the blanket of stars. It wasn't a meteor. It moved with a terrifying purpose, shedding flaming debris as it arced downwards. Jonathan slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt on the dirt road. They watched, breathless, as it impacted in the south field with a muffled thump that shook the ground. "Dear God," Martha breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "Jonathan, what was that?" Jonathan, a man of practical fears and quiet courage, was already shifting the truck into gear. I don't know. But we're about to find out. They found it nestled in a smoldering crater, the cornstalks around it flattened and singed. It wasn't wreckage. It was a ship, small and impossibly smooth, the metal cool to the touch despite its fiery descent. As they approached, a soft hiss emanated from it, and a section of the hull peeled back like a metallic pedal, revealing a small chamber. Inside, cushioned by a strange, gelatinous substance, lay a baby. He was sleeping peacefully, wrapped in a red blanket, looking no more out of place than if he'd been in a bassinet. Martha gasped, her heart clenching with a feeling she couldn't name. It was awe, fear, and a fierce, instantaneous surge of maternal love. She reached in, her hands hesitating for a moment before she lifted the child. He was heavy, far heavier than he looked, but warm and real. He stirred, his dark eyes opening to look at her. "Jonathan," she said, her voice trembling. "He's just a baby." Jonathan circled the craft, his farmer's eyes taking in every impossible detail. He saw the strange, serpentine crest on the blanket. He looked from the alien ship to the innocent child in his wife's arms, and a decision formed in his soul, as solid and rooted as the land he worked. "He's not just a baby, Martha," he said softly, his voice full of wonder. "He's a miracle. Our miracle." They named him Clark. Mizudafu, Japan. The city of Mizudafu was a riot of light and sound, a vibrant, chaotic metropolis where the extraordinary was mundane. Billboards flashed with advertisements for heroes, and the streets were filled with people whose bodies defied the old laws of nature. This was the age of quirks, and humanity had evolved. Inko and Hisashi Midoriya were navigating the late-night traffic, their conversation light and easy. Hisashi was telling a story from work, punctuated by Inko's soft laughter. Their world was normal, comfortable, a small, happy island in the sea of superpowered society. Then, a second sun bloomed in the sky above them. A falling star, moving with impossible speed, shot over the city. Unlike the controlled landings of rescue heroes or the lazy drift of airships, this was a raw, uncontrolled entry. It blazed a trail through the clouds, a piercing shriek cutting through the urban hum before it vanished behind a cluster of high-rises, followed by a distant, echoing crash. Hisashi swerved the car to the shoulder, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "What was that? A villain attack?" "It looked different," Inko said, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. She was a kind, empathetic woman, and her first thought was for potential victims. "We should see if anyone's hurt." The crash site was in a small, under-construction park at the edge of their district. The object had carved a deep furrow in the soft earth, coming to a stop against a pile of steel beams. It was a pod, smaller and more angular than the one that had landed in Kansas, its dark gray hull seeming to absorb the city lights. Steam hissed from its seams. As they got closer, the front of the pod irised open, revealing an interior bathed in a soft green light. There, nestled in a form-fitting crash cradle, was a baby. His hair was a chaotic mop of green-tinged black, and his eyes, wide and staring up at the alien sky, were a startling, vibrant emerald. Inko's breath hitched. He was so small, so alone. She saw the intricate, diamond-like crest on his red blanket, and felt a pang of sorrow for the family that had sent him here. Without hesitation, she moved forward, her heart overriding every instinct for self-preservation. "Inko, wait! It might not be safe," Hisashi warned, but his protest was weak. He could see the look on his wife's face. She reached into the pod and gently lifted the infant. He felt solid, dense, but he didn't cry. Instead, he looked at her with an unnerving, silent intelligence. When her hand brushed his cheek, she felt a faint, static hum, a barely contained energy that resonated deep in her bones. She pulled him close, her motherly instincts kicking in with overwhelming force. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You're all alone." Hisashi came to her side, looking from the advanced technology of the ship to the tiny, impossible child in his wife's arms. In a world of wonders, this felt like something more. A secret. "We can't just leave him," Inko said, her voice firm. He nodded slowly. "No. We can't." They named him Izuku. Parallel childhoods. For the first few years, their lives were a study in contrasts, defined by the worlds that had adopted them. Clark Kent grew up under the vast, open skies of Kansas. His world was one of dirt roads, honest work, and the simple, profound love of his parents. His powers were a secret, a source of quiet wonder and constant caution. His first word was fly, murmured as he hovered a few inches above his crib. Jonathan and Martha taught him to be careful, to hold back, to present himself as nothing more than a normal boy. It was a lesson learned out of love and fear, for a world they weren't sure would understand. Izuku Midoriya grew up in the heart of a bustling Japanese metropolis. His world was a dazzling spectacle of heroes and quirks. From the moment he could talk, he was utterly captivated by them, especially by the towering, ever-smiling symbol of peace, All Might. He would watch videos of All Might's debut for hours, his small face illuminated by the screen, mimicking his hero's hearty laugh. For Izuku, powers weren't something to be hidden. They were the key to becoming a hero, the greatest calling a person could have. The divergence came at the age of 4. In Smallville, Clark was already strong enough to carry his father's toolbox and fast enough to be a blur in the cornfields. His secret was his own, shared only with his parents. In Muzutafu, Izuku was taken to the quirk specialist, a standard rite of passage. Inko sat nervously as the doctor ran his tests. The X-rays of Izuku's foot showed he was missing the extra joint, a common indicator of being quirkless. But the rest of the results were baffling. It's anomalous, Midoriya-san, the doctor said, rubbing his temples. His cellular structure is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's denser, more complex. His bioelectric field is off the charts. He isn't quirkless, not in the traditional sense. But he doesn't have a quirk either. He's a biological blank slate of immense potential. I can't register him as having a power, because by our definitions he doesn't. The official diagnosis was quirkless. The word was a death sentence to a child's dream. That night, Izuku sat in his chair, bathed in the glow of the computer monitor, watching All Might save hundreds of people from a disaster. He turned to his mother, his body trembling, tears streaming down his face as he pointed a shaky finger at the screen. "Mom," he choked out, his voice small and broken. Can I be a hero too?" Inko rushed to him, wrapping him in a hug. But her tears weren't just for his shattered dream. They were tears of fear. She knew he wasn't powerless. She'd seen the small things, the way his toys would sometimes float when he got upset, the time he looked at a wall and described a cat in the next room, the way he never, ever got sick or even scraped his knee. He had a power, a terrifying one, and it had no name, no rules, and no place in their society. "I'm sorry, Izuku," she sobbed, holding him tight. "I'm so sorry." He thought she was sorry he couldn't be a hero. In truth, she was sorry for the impossible burden he would have to carry alone. The years that followed solidified their paths. At 8 years old, Jonathan Kent suffered a heart attack while fixing a fence, the old tractor slipping its brake and rolling towards him. Clark, seeing his father about to be crushed, moved without thinking. A blur of red and blue flannel, he shot forward and caught the multi-ton machine, lifting it with a grunt of effort, his feet sinking into the soft earth. The look on his father's face was a mixture of terror, pride, and profound awe. That day, they sat on the porch and Jonathan told him, "You are here for a reason, Clark. A reason we don't know yet. And until we do, you have to be careful. You have to keep this part of you a secret." Clark nodded, understanding the weight of his father's words. He was different, and different was dangerous. At that same age, Izuku faced his own defining moment. In a park, Katsuki Bakugo and his friends were cornering a younger child. Bakugo, his quirk already powerful and flashy, grinned with cruel confidence. "What's the matter, crybaby? Gonna tell your mommy?" he taunted, setting off small explosions in his palms. "Stop it, Kaken," a small voice said. Bakugo turned. There stood Izuku, his fists clenched, his skinny legs trembling, standing between the bully and his victim. Bakugo laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Deku? What are you gonna do? You're quirkless and useless. You can't do anything." To prove his point, he lunged, unleashing a small but stinging explosion right at Izuku's chest. It was a move that would have knocked any other kid down, leaving a minor burn. The explosion hit Izuku with a loud crack. His shirt was singed and blackened. But Izuku himself didn't even flinch. He just stood there, his emerald eyes wide with a familiar terror, not of Bakugo, but of himself. He hadn't felt a thing. Bakugo stared, his red eyes wide with disbelief. He'd put some real force into that one. How? That was the day Bakugo's bullying changed. It was no longer about physical dominance, because he couldn't physically dominate the unbreakable Deku. It became psychological. He called him a freak, a creep. He mocked his constant muttering and scribbling. Izuku's invulnerability wasn't a strength. It was just another piece of evidence for how weird and pathetic he was. While Clark was learning to hide his powers, Izuku was desperately trying to understand his. He filled notebook after notebook. They started as hero analysis for the future, but soon became something more personal. Incident 14. Sensed the mailman from 3 blocks away. Auditory senses seemed to be increasing in sensitivity. Must wear headphones in crowded areas to avoid overload. Incident 22. Trip down the stairs. Instead of falling, I hovered an inch off the ground for 1.2 seconds before crashing. Involuntary kinetic control? Need more data. Incident 31. Stared at my pencil too hard in class and it started to get hot. Focused heat emission from my eyes? Extremely dangerous. Must never, ever get angry while looking at someone. His notebooks were his only confidants. They were a meticulous, scientific record of a boy trying to diagnose his own alien biology, using the language of quirks to describe something that was anything but. By the time they were teenagers, their identities were set. Clark Kent was the mild-mannered, slightly clumsy son of a Kansas farmer. He was quiet, kind, and tried his best to blend in. But in secret, he was becoming a myth. The Smallville Angel, a blur that would pull people from car wrecks, a phantom that would stop robberies before anyone even saw a face. He used his powers to help, always from the shadows, a guardian his town never knew it had. He felt the profound loneliness of his uniqueness, a god pretending to be a man, his only solace the infinite expanse of the night sky he would soar through when the world was asleep. Izuku Midoriya was the outcast of Aldera Junior High. Quirkless Deku, the weirdo who muttered to himself and filled notebooks with creepy analysis. He learned to suppress his powers with an iron will. He forced himself to walk at a normal pace when he could run faster than a bullet train. He wore lead-lined glasses under the pretense of a prescription to dull his vision, to stop himself from accidentally seeing through things. He trained himself to feel pain when he was hit, to flinch and cry out, a pantomime of fragility that became second nature. The constant suppression was exhausting, a pressure that was always building behind his eyes. He was a Kryptonian pretending to be a quirkless human, in a society that celebrated power but ostracized those who didn't fit into a neat category. Yet, through it all, the seed of heroism his parents had planted, the one nurtured by the light of All Might, never died. If anything, it grew stronger, more resilient. He saw heroism not as an application of power, but as an act of will. It was the desire to save others, even at great personal cost. One afternoon, he saw Bakugo and his cronies harassing a student, trying to steal his money. Izuku knew he could stop them in a nanosecond. He could disarm them, tie them up, and be gone before they knew what happened. But he couldn't. It would mean revealing himself, shattering the fragile normalcy he had built, and unleashing a power he was terrified he couldn't control. So he did what he always did. He walked forward, putting himself between the bullies and their target. "Leave him alone, Kaken," Bakugo sneered, his expression a mix of contempt and genuine confusion. "Still playing hero, Deku? You're unbreakable, we all know that. But you're still worthless. You have all that toughness, and you do nothing with it. What's the point of you?" He shoved Izuku hard. Izuku stumbled back, putting on a show of being pushed, his heart aching. Bakugo was right. What was the point of being invincible if you couldn't stand up for anyone? What was the point of all this power if he was too afraid to use it? He still idolized All Might. He still dreamed of being a hero who saves people with a smile. But his dream felt more distant than the stars his pod had once traveled. He had all the power in the universe, but he felt utterly, hopelessly powerless. He was a living paradox, A boy with the strength of a god and the heart of a hero, trapped in a world that had no place for him. He didn't know that halfway across that same world, under a different sky, another boy was looking up at the stars, feeling just as alone. 2 falling stars had reached their destination. Their journey was over, but their story, the story of the last sons of Krypton, was only just beginning. The transition from boy to young man was a season of profound and unsettling change for both of Krypton's last sons. For Clark Kent, it was an expansion, a constant pushing against the boundaries of a world that felt increasingly small. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a compression, a desperate, crushing effort to contain a universe of power within the fragile vessel of a teenage boy. In Smallville, Kansas, the night was Clark's sanctuary. The Kent farm, miles from the nearest town, offered a privacy that was both a blessing and a curse. From the hayloft of the old red barn, he could see the curve of the earth, a tapestry of glittering cities and sleeping towns under a dome of impossible stars. It was up here, suspended between the soil that had raised him and the cosmos that had birthed him, that he let the mask of Clark Kent fall away. His powers were blooming with the ferocity of a prairie fire. His vision, once merely sharp, could now pierce the veil of the visible spectrum. He could see the heat signatures of nocturnal animals in the fields, the stress fractures in the barn's support beams, the faint, shimmering glow of radio waves that crisscrossed the sky. His strength was a casual, terrifying thing. He had to consciously remember to use a doorknob instead of simply pushing through the wall. But it was his hearing that had become his obsession. It was no longer just the ability to hear a pin drop in the next town over. It was a deluge, a tidal wave of sound that threatened to drown him if he didn't learn to control it. He spent hours in the loft, eyes closed, meditating not for silence, but for clarity. He learned to filter, to isolate threads of sound from the global cacophony. He could hear the frantic heartbeat of a stray cat trapped in a storm drain in Metropolis, the whispered prayer of a woman in a London hospital, the rhythmic chant of monks in the Himalayas. He was the world's confessor, its silent witness. He listened for cries of help, and he acted on them when he could, a phantom gust of wind, a red and blue blur that was gone before a thank you could be uttered. But beneath the altruism, a deeper, more selfish longing drove him. He was searching. He would tune out the human noise, the cacophony of 7 billion lives, and listen for anything different, a heartbeat that didn't follow a human rhythm, a voice that resonated at a frequency no human throat could produce. He was listening for an echo of himself, a sign that the vast, cold loneliness of his existence was not absolute. Most nights, he found nothing but the silence of the stars, a silence that felt like an answer in itself. Thousands of miles away, in the relentlessly vibrant heart of Muzurifu, Izuku Midoriya was fighting the opposite battle. He wasn't trying to hear the world. He was desperately trying to shut it out. His final year of junior high was a daily exercise in agonizing self-control. The city was a sensory minefield. The roar of traffic, the overlapping chatter of thousands of people, the electronic hum of a million devices. It was a constant, grinding assault on his Kryptonian ears. The sights were just as overwhelming. With a flicker of concentration, the walls of his classroom would dissolve into a semi-transparent lattice of steel and wiring, revealing the students in the next room. His teachers' lectures were punctuated by the frantic thump of their heartbeats, betraying their anxieties and frustrations. To survive, he had built a prison for his senses. His glasses, which he claimed were for a severe astigmatism, were secretly lined with a thin, flexible film of lead, just enough to dull his vision and prevent accidental X-ray bursts. He wore hoodies and long sleeves even in the summer, the extra layers helping to dampen the tactile input of the world. He kept his headphones on constantly, playing a low, steady stream of white noise to drown out the city's roar. He was a boy walking through a hurricane, pretending it was a calm summer day. The strain was immense. It manifested in his constant, anxious muttering, a habit that had earned him no small amount of ridicule. He wasn't talking to himself. He was running constant calculations, vocalizing the mental gymnastics required to keep himself in check. Left foot, normal pressure. Right foot, don't crack the pavement. Breathe, but not too deep, don't want to cause a vacuum. Someone bumped into me, flinch, react, pretend it hurt. Katsuki Bakugo, his childhood friend turned relentless tormentor, had honed his bullying into a precise psychological weapon. Physical attacks were pointless, as he'd learned long ago. Instead, Bakugo attacked his very existence. Still scribbling in that creepy notebook, Deku? Bakugo would sneer, slamming a hand down on Izuku's desk, causing the other students to snicker. Analyzing heroes? You can't be a hero. You're a quirkless nobody. You're just a freak who doesn't even get hurt. What's the point of you? That question, what's the point of you, was the one that echoed in the silence of Izuku's mind long after the school bell had rung. He was a living contradiction. He possessed a power that dwarfed all mights, a power that could reshape the world, yet he was forced to live as the most powerless of individuals. He dreamed of saving people with a smile, but his every waking moment was spent saving them from himself. From the cataclysm he could unleash with a single careless sneeze or an unguarded emotional outburst. His heroism was a heroism of restraint, a thankless, invisible, and deeply lonely burden. One cool autumn night, the impossible happened. In the Kent hayloft, Clark was pushing his limits further than ever before. He cast his senses like a net across the planet, letting the familiar symphony of Earth wash over him. The rumble of the mid-Atlantic ridge, the collective sigh of the Amazon rainforest, the high-pitched chatter of global communications. He filtered it all, searching for the anomaly, the note that didn't belong, and then he heard it. It was faint at first, a whisper beneath the roar of a metropolis on the far side of the Pacific. A heartbeat. But it was like no heartbeat he had ever heard. Human hearts were a steady, soft ba-bump, ba-bump. This was a staccato rhythm, a powerful double beat that sounded like a hummingbird's wings drumming against the vault door. Th thump thump. Th thump thump. It was impossibly fast, impossibly strong. A sun burning in a cage of ribs. Clark's own heart, a perfect match to that rhythm, hammered in his chest. A cold, electric shock of pure astonishment shot through him. He focused, pouring all his concentration into that single, miraculous sound. It was real. It was there. A living being, thousands of miles away, whose biology sang the same strange song as his own. He was not alone. The realization was so overwhelming it almost brought him to his knees. After a lifetime of feeling like a cosmic castaway, he had found another signal. Tentatively, afraid of scaring it away, he decided to reach out. He didn't shout. He gathered his thoughts, focused his intent, and using a trick of vocal cord control he'd been practicing, he projected his voice on a subsonic frequency, a whisper meant to travel the globe. In English, the only language he knew, he sent his message into the void. Hello? Can anyone hear me? In his small bedroom in Muzurifu, surrounded by the ever-watchful posters of All Might, Izuku Midoriya was losing his battle for control. It had been a long day. Bakugo's taunts had been particularly cutting, and the sensory noise of the city had scraped his nerves raw. He felt like a dam about to burst, the pressure of his contained power building behind his eyes, making his skull ache. He sat on the floor in a meditative pose, his breathing shallow, his hands resting on his knees. This was his last resort, a technique he developed to stave off a full sensory overload. He would focus on one thing, the hum of his desk lamp, the texture of the floorboards, and use it as an anchor to pull his consciousness inward, building walls of silence around his mind. He was sinking into that quiet place, the roar of the world finally beginning to recede, when a voice pierced through his concentration. It was a whisper, spoken in a language he'd studied in school but rarely heard, English. The voice was young, male, and saturated with a strange mixture of hope and trepidation. It didn't come through his ears, it bloomed directly in the center of his mind, as clear as his own thoughts. Hello? Can anyone hear me? Izuku's eyes snapped open. His heart, that supercharged Kryptonian engine, hammered against his ribs. He scrambled to his feet, looking wildly around the empty room. The voice hadn't been a sound. It had been a presence. A signal. His mind raced. A telepathic quirk? But it felt different. It felt familiar. Like the low-level hum of his own body, the energy he was always suppressing had suddenly found a resonant frequency. It was like a tuning fork vibrating in response to another, unseen one across a vast distance. Panic and a wild, unfamiliar hope warred within him. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, he focused on that feeling, that strange new connection, and thought back with all his might. He didn't know how, he just did. In Japanese, the only language that felt like home, he projected his own frantic question. There? Who's there? In Kansas, Clark flinched as the thought hit him. It wasn't a sound. It was a pure concept, a question mark made of confusion and fear, broadcast in a language whose syllables were alien to him but whose meaning was perfectly clear. Who's there? He couldn't understand the word, but he understood the panic, the shock, the underlying current of "am I going insane?" that mirrored his own feelings. He could feel the other consciousness, young, overwhelmed, and incredibly, impossibly, like his own. A grin of pure, unadulterated joy split Clark's face. He wanted to shout, to fly, to tell his parents. But he knew this was a secret too fragile for the light. He sent back a feeling, not words, a sense of calm, of reassurance, of shared wonder. It's okay. I'm like you. Izuku felt it wash over him, a wave of tranquility that soothed the ragged edges of his frayed nerves. The fear receded, replaced by a staggering, world-altering sense of awe. Like me? For a few precious moments, they remained connected, two minds touching across an ocean. They were two solitary lighthouses that had spent their entire lives shining their beams into an empty sea, only to finally, miraculously, see an answering light flash in the distance. They couldn't speak, they couldn't see each other, but they knew. The fundamental truth of their lives had been rewritten. They were not alone. The connection faded, the strain too much for them to hold. Izuku was left standing in his room, panting, the silence now feeling heavier, more profound than before. Clark sat in the hayloft, the sounds of his world returning, but they no longer sounded lonely. They were just a background noise to the most beautiful signal he had ever heard. It was their secret. A faint whisper that had crossed the world and changed everything. A few weeks later, Izuku Midoriya was walking home, his mind still reeling from the secret contact. He hadn't heard the voice again, but the memory of it was a constant, warm presence in the back of his mind. It had given him a sliver of hope, a sense that his strange existence might have a purpose after all. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice the chaos until he was in the middle of it. A crowd had gathered at the entrance to a narrow shopping arcade. Smoke billowed from the entrance, and the ground trembled with the force of explosions. A villain attack. His hero analyst's brain kicked in immediately. He pushed his way to the front, his notebook already in hand. It was a slimy, amorphous villain, a living sewer of sludge, and he had a hostage. Izuku's blood ran cold when he saw the spiky blonde hair and the furious, terrified red eyes of the captive. It was Bakugo. The pro-heroes on the scene, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Empty Lady, were all stymied. Death Arms couldn't get a grip on the liquid body. Kamui's wood was useless against the villain's form and the fire Bakugo was setting off in his panic. Empty Lady was too big for the narrow alley. They were waiting for someone with the right quirk. Izuku watched, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He saw the desperation in Bakugo's eyes. He saw his childhood friend, the boy who had tormented him for years, suffocating, and a cold, hard knot of shame formed in his stomach. He stood there, a spectator, while possessing the power to end the entire confrontation in less than a second. He could move faster than they could see, pull Bakugo free, and neutralize the villain before he could even react. But the conditioning of a lifetime was a powerful chain. Don't show them. Don't let them see. They won't understand. It's too dangerous. You'll hurt someone. Then, All Might arrived. A wave of relief washed over the crowd. The symbol of peace was here. But as the hero rushed forward, he clutched his side, faltering for a split second. Izuku, with his Kryptonian eyes, saw it clearly. A flicker of pain, a brief glimpse of the profound weakness his idol hid from the world. And in that moment, Izuku understood. All Might was stalling. He was close to his limit. He couldn't act recklessly. The heroes were waiting. Everyone was waiting. And Bakugo was dying. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was a pure, primal instinct, the same instinct that had driven his father to put him in a pod and shoot him at a star. The heroic spirit he had admired for so long ceased to be an external concept, and became the driving force of his own body. his years of self-repression shattered. One moment, he was standing behind the police barricade. The next, he was moving. To the crowd, it was a sudden gust of wind, a green and black blur that shot from their midst. The police tape barely fluttered. They just felt a rush of displaced air and saw a figure suddenly standing before the monster. For Izuku, the world turned to syrup. The panicked shouts of the heroes slowed to a deep, guttural drone. The crackle of Bakugo's explosions became a slow, lazy fizz. He saw every particle of dust hanging in the air, every ripple in the sludge villain's body. Time itself seemed to bend to his will. He didn't just throw his backpack. That was the conscious, panicked thought of the boy he was pretending to be. His body, finally unleashed, did something far more effective. As he ran, his subconscious Kryptonian instincts took over. He scooped his bag from his shoulder and, with a flick of his wrist that moved at a fraction of the speed of sound, he hurled it. The yellow backpack didn't just hit the villain, it impacted with the force of a cannonball, striking one of the villain's eyes. The sludge monster roared, its form momentarily disrupted. That was the opening. In the microsecond it took for the villain to recoil, Izuku was there, his hands plunging into the viscous body. The slime felt disgusting, but it had no purchase on him. His fingers closed around Bakugo's arm. Kaken! Bakugo's eyes, wide with shock and suffocation, met his. He saw not the useless Deku, but a boy with a terrifying, desperate fire in his eyes. What the hell are you doing here? Bakugo rasped. My legs just started moving. Izuku yelled back, the lie feeling thin even to him. He pulled. The villain's body resisted, but it was like mud resisting bedrock. With a surge of strength he had never dared to use, he ripped Bakugo free. The entire sequence, from the moment he left the crowd to the moment Bakugo was gasping for air on the pavement, had taken 1.7 seconds. The sudden, shocking appearance of this quirkless boy, performing an impossible rescue, was the catalyst All Might needed. Shamed and inspired, the symbol of peace swelled to his full size, his weakness forgotten in a blaze of heroic fury. I really am pathetic, All Might boomed, his voice shaking the very air. Detroit smash. A hurricane of wind pressure tore through the alley, splattering the sludge villain against the walls and changing the weather. Rain began to fall. The crisis was over. Later, after being chewed out by the pro-heroes for his recklessness and praised for his bravery, Izuku was walking home, his body trembling with adrenaline and fear. He had done it. He had revealed a glimpse of what he was. What would happen now? I am here. Izuku spun around to see All Might, in his full, muscle-bound glory, standing at the corner. The hero gave him a lecture, a mix of stern warning and genuine gratitude. Then, as he was about to launch into the sky, he deflated. With a puff of steam, the towering symbol of peace vanished, replaced by a skeletal man with hollowed eyes, coughing up blood. Izuku shrieked in shock. On a nearby rooftop, away from prying eyes, Toshinori Yagi explained his injury, his time limit, the truth behind the smile. Izuku listened, his heart breaking for the hero he had worshipped his entire life. The conversation followed the path Izuku had imagined in his dreams 1,000 times, until it took a sharp, unexpected turn. That was a foolish, reckless thing you did back there, young man, Toshinori said, his voice raspy. But it was also the most heroic thing I saw all day. You moved before anyone else. Tell me, what is your quirk? Izuku flinched, the familiar shame washing over him. I don't have one. I'm quirkless. The doctor said so. Toshinori stared at him, his blue eyes sharp and analytical, piercing through Izuku's carefully constructed facade. He had seen the boy move. He had felt the impossible speed, the shockwave of the backpack's impact. That wasn't the frantic, clumsy charge of a normal, terrified kid. It was controlled, precise, and inhumanly fast. No, Toshinori said slowly, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. No, that's not right. A quirk is a biological function, an extension of the human body. It can be measured. It can be categorized. What I saw back there, when you moved, the air itself warped around you. The sound of your feet was silent, faster than the ear could process. That wasn't a quirk. He leaned forward, his gaze intense, searching. I have held the power of one for all for decades. It is a sacred torch that allows me to see the embers of power in others. And in you, I don't see an ember, I see an inferno. Something ancient, something alien. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. His blood turned to ice. No one had ever looked at him and seen the truth. They saw a quirkless boy, a weirdo, a freak. But All Might, the greatest hero on earth, looked at him and saw an alien. When I saw you run into that danger, Toshinori continued, his voice filled with a strange awe, I wasn't just reminded of what it means to be a hero. I was reminded that the universe is far larger and more wondrous than our world of quirks. That there are forces beyond our understanding. He stood up, his frail form silhouetted against the setting sun. The questions Izuku had expected, why did you do it? What were you thinking, were replaced by one he had never, in his wildest dreams or most terrifying nightmares, prepared for. All Might, the symbol of peace, looked down at the boy who had just revealed a sliver of his cosmic secret, and asked the only question that now mattered. Young man, what are you? The boardroom on the 95th floor of Lex Corp Tower in Metropolis was a sterile cathedral of glass and steel, designed to make mortals feel small and gods feel at home. At its head, Lex Luthor presided, a man whose ambition was as towering as the skyscraper that bore his name. He was dressed in a suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin, a dark purple silk tie the only splash of color in his monochromatic ensemble. The Prometheus Array, Lex announced, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that filled the room, is not merely a satellite. It is a promise. A network of 24 orbital platforms providing free, uncensorable internet access and pinpoint-accurate climate data to every corner of the globe. A gift from Lex Corp. A gift from me, to humanity. He gestured to the holographic display at the center of the table. A shimmering, complex latticework of a satellite floated there, rotating slowly. It was a marvel of engineering, bristling with antennas and sensor pods. A nervous, sweat-beaded engineer named Dr. Eris Thorne cleared his throat. Mr. Luthor, with all due respect, the energy readings from the primary solar converter are still fluctuating outside of acceptable parameters. The containment field for the cold fusion core is revolutionary. Dr. Lex cut him off, his smile never faltering, though a glacial chill entered his eyes. And revolutions are not built on acceptable parameters. They are built on vision, on a willingness to push beyond the timid grasp of caution. He turned his gaze to the other board members, each a titan of industry and finance. The Prometheus Array is Lex Corp's magnum opus. It will elevate mankind, freeing it from the shackles of ignorance and the whims of a chaotic planet. We launch on schedule. Dr. Thorne paled but knew better than to argue. The will of Lex Luthor was as immutable as a law of physics. The launch proceeded. For 3 weeks, it was a triumph. The world celebrated Lex Luthor, the benevolent futurist, the real-life superhero. Then, over the vast, empty expanse of the North Pacific, Prometheus 1 began to scream. Not a sound that human ears could hear, but a shriek of data, a torrent of error codes that flooded the monitors at Lex Corp's mission control. Dr. Thorne watched in horror as his worst fears were realized. The solar converter, unable to handle the sheer volume of unfiltered solar radiation, overloaded. The containment field for the cold fusion core flickered. A cascade failure ripped through the satellite's systems. On the 95th floor, Lex watched the telemetry on his private screen, his expression unreadable. Orbital decay is accelerating exponentially, an aide reported, his voice trembling. It's coming down, sir. Impact zone is the North Pacific Gyre, but the debris field. God, the debris field will be massive. It could shower the entire western seaboard of the United States and the eastern coast of Japan with wreckage. Unacceptable, Lex stated calmly, as if discussing a minor stock fluctuation. Alert the relevant authorities. Let them scramble their little jets. Let the world see how fragile their systems are. He turned to look out the panoramic window at his city, a proprietary smirk touching his lips. He had given humanity fire. Now, he would watch them get burned. It was always the most effective way to teach a lesson. Smallville, Kansas. Clark Kent was mending a fence post with his father, the familiar, rhythmic work a comfort in his tumultuous inner world. He was learning to live with the secret of the other heartbeat, the faint whisper he had heard weeks ago. It was a private miracle, a hope he nurtured in the quiet moments of his life, but his expanded senses also brought a new kind of suffering. He heard everything, everywhere, all at once. He was hammering a nail when the sounds began. First, a high-frequency digital shriek from orbit, the death cry of a machine. Then, the panicked, overlapping voices from NORAD, from the Pentagon, from Japan's Aerospace Exploration Agency, JAXA. The words were different, but the terror was universal. Uncontrolled descent, orbital velocity 7 kilometers per second, she's not gonna burn up, she's too big. Lex Corp's Prometheus. It's the size of a school bus, for God's sake. Debris cone projection covers Okinawa to California. The hammer stopped inches from the nail. Jonathan looked at his son, seeing the far-off, haunted look in his eyes that he had come to recognize. Clark? What is it? Something's falling, Clark said, his voice low and tight. He dropped the hammer and looked up at the clear blue sky, but his eyes were seeing something far beyond it. He could see it now with his telescopic vision, a man-made star, growing brighter, trailing fire and plasma as it tore through the upper atmosphere. A satellite. A big one. It's not going to burn up completely. They're saying it's going to hit the ocean, but the debris. He didn't need to finish. Jonathan's weathered face, usually a landscape of calm resolve, tightened with grim understanding. This wasn't a cat in a tree or a car crash on a county road. This was global. What are you going to do? Jonathan asked. It wasn't a question of if, but how. Clark looked at his hands that could crush steel into dust. For years he had used his gifts in the shadows, a local legend, a ghost. But this was too big for the shadows. I have to stop it, Clark said, the simple statement landing with the weight of destiny. He ran, a blur of motion, towards the barn. He met his mother in the farmhouse. She was holding something in her hands, the red blanket he had been wrapped in as a baby. The Kryptonian fabric was pristine, untouched by the years. Beside it was a simple set of blue work clothes and sturdy red boots. Your father called me, Martha said, her voice thick with emotion, her hands trembling as she held out the blanket. I always knew this day would come. I hoped it wouldn't be so soon. Her eyes were filled with a mother's terror and a mother's pride. The world is going to see you now, Clark. All of you. And they're going to be afraid. I know, Clark said softly, taking the blanket. Its fabric felt like a part of him. Just remember who you are, she said, her hand cupping his cheek. You're not just a power. You are Clark Kent. My son. And you have a good heart. Don't ever let them make you forget that. He nodded, pulled her into a hug that was both infinitely strong and infinitely gentle, and then he was gone. Outside, by the storm cellar where the ship that brought him to Earth lay hidden, he wrapped the red fabric around his shoulders. It felt right. Like a cape. A symbol. He took a deep breath, bent his knees, and leaped into the sky. The world below fell away with breathtaking speed. He didn't just fly. He erupted from the Kansas soil, shattering the sound barrier in a deafening double boom that rattled windows for miles. The blue of the sky deepened to indigo, then to the black of the void. He was a red and blue comet, ascending to meet a falling demon of fire and steel. Mizudafu, Japan. Izuku Midoriya was in his bedroom, hunched over his latest notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. He was trying to dissect the physics of MT Lady's gigantification quirk when the sound pierced through his carefully maintained white noise. It was the same chaotic symphony of panic that Clark was hearing, a global chorus of fear. JAXA's frantic communications were the loudest, a storm of Japanese laced with English technical terms. He cross-referenced it with the live news feed on his computer. A special report had interrupted the afternoon cartoons. The headline was stark, Catastrophe in the Pacific. He saw the trajectory map, the projected debris field. His home. His city. His mother. He immediately thought of All Might. The symbol of peace would handle it. He always did. But then, another sound filtered through the noise, one much closer to home. He focused his hearing, pinpointing a familiar, rasping voice from a few miles away, at Yue High. It was Tashinori Yagi, speaking on the phone with what sounded like the principal. Can't maintain my form at that altitude, Nize. And even if I could, I don't have the raw propulsion to get there in time. This is beyond me. The words hit Izuku like a physical blow. Beyond him. All Might, the pillar of their world, had a limit, and this disaster was on the other side of it. The heroes couldn't stop it. No one could stop it, except him. The realization settled in his chest, cold and heavy. The secret he had protected for 15 years, the power he had suppressed with every fiber of his being, was the only thing standing between millions of people and annihilation. His entire life had been a rehearsal for this single, terrifying moment. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. His movements were slow, deliberate. He walked into the living room where his mother, Inko, was watching the news, her hands pressed to her mouth in horror. "Mom," he said. She turned, her eyes wide and tearful. "Izuku! Isn't it terrible? The heroes, surely they'll do something." "They can't," Izuku said softly. "Not this time." Inko looked at her son. She saw the familiar anxiety in his posture, but underneath it was a new, terrifying resolve. The frantic, muttering energy he usually spent on suppressing himself was now focused outward, a silent, powerful hum that seemed to make the very air in the room vibrate. She understood immediately. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Izuku, no. You can't. They'll see you. The world, they'll—" "I know," he said, and the certainty in his voice chilled her more than any shout could have. "But I can't just stand here and do nothing. Isn't that what All Might would do? Isn't that what it means to be a hero?" Tears streamed down Inko's face. She looked at her sweet, kind boy, who had been burdened with a power too great for any world, and she saw not a monster or an alien, but a hero, forged in secret and about to be revealed. Her fear was eclipsed by a wave of fierce, heartbreaking love. She rushed to a closet and pulled out a small, protected box. Inside was the dark red blanket he had come to them in. The strange, 8-pointed diamond crest gleamed in the dim light. She also grabbed his dark green school gym tracksuit. Her hands, clumsy with panic and purpose, found her sewing kit. "If you're going to do this," she said through her sobs, her needle flying with surprising speed, "then they should know. They should know you stand for hope." In a few frantic minutes she had cut the crest from the indestructible blanket and stitched it onto the chest of his tracksuit. It was a crude, homemade costume, but it was a symbol, nonetheless. Izuku pulled on the tracksuit. It felt absurd, like a child playing dress-up for the end of the world. He looked at his mother, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "Mom, go," she said, her voice a mix of a sob and a command. "Be careful. And come home." He nodded, unable to speak. He hugged her, a lifetime of unspoken truths and secret fears passing between them in that one embrace. Then he turned, walked to the balcony of their small apartment, and stepped onto the railing. For a moment, he just stood there, a boy in a green tracksuit on the edge of the sky. Then, with a prayer to a hero he now knew was only a man, and with the hope of a world on his shoulders, he pushed off. He did not fly. He detonated. The force of his launch shattered the balcony railing and cracked the building's concrete. A sonic boom, a thunderclap from a clear sky, echoed across Mizurufu, setting off car alarms and rattling windows. To the people below who happened to look up, he was just a flicker, a green and black streak that tore a path through the sky, gone in an instant. Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless Deku, was ascending to meet his destiny. The mesosphere. 50 kilometers above the Earth, the air is thin and cold, and the sky is a deep, stardusted black. Below, the planet is a breathtaking swirl of blue and white, a marble of impossible beauty. It was here, at the edge of space, that the Prometheus array made its final, fiery stand. It was a tumbling behemoth of wreckage, glowing cherry red from the friction of re-entry, shedding smaller pieces of debris that burned up like shooting stars. It was a dragon of fire and death, and it was getting bigger by the second. From the west, a red and blue streak arrived, cutting through the thin atmosphere with disciplined grace. Clark reached the satellite first, the cold of space doing nothing to cool the inferno of the falling machine. The heat was immense, a physical wave that washed over him. He braced himself, positioning his body to push against the satellite's primary chassis, aiming to alter its trajectory. The sheer kinetic force was staggering, a multi-ton object moving at hypersonic speed. It was like trying to stop a mountain. His boots glowed with the heat, but he held firm, his muscles straining against the impossible physics of the moment. Just as he began to push, a second sonic boom, sharper and more chaotic than his own, announced a new arrival. From the east, a green and black blur slammed into the opposite side of the satellite with the force of a meteor strike. Clark stared, dumbfounded. It was a boy. A teenager younger than him, dressed in what looked like a simple tracksuit. He had wild, dark green hair that floated in the near-zero gravity and eyes that burned with a fierce, emerald light. The boy was struggling, his form less stable than Clark's, his flight more of a controlled explosion than a graceful soar. But he was holding his section of the satellite, his knuckles white, his teeth gritted in a grimace of sheer effort. And on the chest of his tracksuit, crudely stitched but unmistakable, was a crest. A diamond, with 8 points radiating outwards. A symbol of the House of L. For Clark, it was a moment that defied all logic. His mind, which could process information at the speed of light, simply stopped. He was seeing the impossible. The heartbeat. The whisper. It was real. It was a boy. And he was wearing his family's crest. Izuku, his entire body screaming from the strain of pushing against an object with the momentum of a weapon of mass destruction, looked across the burning wreckage. He saw a man. Not just a man, an icon, ripped from the pages of a comic book he'd never read. He was broad-shouldered, with a jawline that could have been carved from granite, and an air of calm, absolute confidence that Izuku had only ever seen on one other person. The man's suit was simple, primary colors, but it was the symbol on his chest that made Izuku's analytical mind whirl, the Serpentine S. The primary crest of the House of L, a symbol he knew intimately from the data files embedded in his ship's command key, the ones he secretly studied every night. He wasn't a hallucination. He wasn't a quirk. He was Kryptonian. The two last sons of Krypton stared at each other across a burning pyre, 50 kilometers above a world that knew nothing of their existence. In their eyes was the same shocked, earth-shattering question, "You?" There was no time for questions. The satellite groaned, a massive support strut threatening to shear off and create a new, deadly projectile. Clark, recovering first, met Izuku's gaze. He gave a sharp, single nod, pointing his chin upward, towards a higher, safer orbit. Izuku understood immediately. It was a communication more profound than language. A shared instinct, born of a shared biology. We are the same. We do this together. He nodded back, a flicker of understanding in his terrified, determined eyes. They pushed. It was a symphony of impossible power. Clark was the foundation, his flight steady, his strength a relentless, overwhelming force. He was a battering ram of pure will. Izuku was more frantic, but just as strong. He adjusted his position constantly, his analytical mind processing the satellite's structural integrity, shouting muffled warnings that Clark seemed to understand through instinct alone. The port's solar array is unstable. We need to shift pressure starboard. They worked in perfect, unspoken harmony. Clark would provide the brute force, and Izuku, spotting a stress fracture, would apply a precise burst of energy to counteract it. They became a single entity, two halves of a Kryptonian whole, wrestling a man-made demon at the gates of heaven. Slowly, agonizingly, the satellite's trajectory began to shift. Its deadly downward plunge arced upwards. They pushed it higher and higher, out of the thick atmosphere, back into the cold, forgiving vacuum. With one final, unified shove, they sent the Prometheus array tumbling into a stable, if useless, orbital decay, where it would circle the Earth as a dead monument for centuries. The immediate danger was over. The world watches. On the ground, the world went from panic to stunned disbelief. Grainy footage from weather balloons, shaky recordings from commercial airliners, and high-powered amateur telescopes all captured the same impossible image. Two figures, glowing like angels in the upper atmosphere, pushing a falling star back into the heavens. News reports exploded across the globe. "We are getting unconfirmed reports," a CNN anchor said, his professional composure cracking, "of two unidentified flying individuals who appear to have intercepted the Lex Corp satellite. Military sources are refusing to comment." On the BBC, A flustered astrophysicist tried to explain what he was seeing. The forces involved they're astronomical. This is not a prank. This is not a weather phenomenon. I don't know what this is, but it is real, and it has just saved millions of lives. In Japan, an NHK broadcast showed a freeze frame of the two figures. Who are these mysterious saviors? Are they heroes with unknown quirks? Or something else entirely? They are being called the Star Children, the Supermen. In his tower, Lex Luthor watched the footage on a massive screen, a glass of priceless scotch in his hand. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He was intrigued. He leaned closer, his sharp eyes focused on the symbols visible on their chests. Prometheus gave man fire, he murmured to the empty room, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. And in return, he was punished by the gods. He took a sip of his scotch. It seems the gods have decided to intervene in my affairs personally. How utterly fascinating. He pressed a button on his intercom. Mercy, he said. Yes, Mr. Luthor? A cool, female voice replied. Scramble the deep-sea recovery teams. I want every fragment of that satellite you can find. Then, get me everything we have on the meteorological phenomena surrounding Smallville, Kansas, 15 years ago. Do the same for Muzutafu, Japan. I want to know where my new gods fell from. He paused, looking at the screen where the two figures now hovered side by side. And get Dr. Thorne. It's time to start a new project. Project Kryptonite. In the silent, cold emptiness of space, the work was done. Clark and Izuku drifted, panting from an exertion that no human could comprehend. The burning glow of re-entry had faded from their makeshift suits. Below them, the Earth turned, serene and beautiful, blissfully unaware of the bullet it had just dodged. They finally turned to face each other fully. Clark looked at the boy, the other one, and saw the face of his salvation from loneliness. Izuku looked at the man and saw the living embodiment of the history he had only ever read about, the answer to the question that had defined his entire existence. No words were spoken. None were needed. In the silent vacuum of space, with the world saved at their backs, the last sons of Krypton floated, finally, irrevocably together. The Age of Wonder had just begun. The descent was a silent, controlled fall through layers of sky. The searing heat of their atmospheric battle bled away into the biting cold of the stratosphere, a temperature that was no more bothersome to them than a mild spring breeze. Below, the earth spread out, a living, breathing canvas of deep blues and swirling whites. For the first time, they were seeing it not as an abstract globe, but as the world they had just saved. Clark, more experienced in the art of flight, led the way. He moved with a quiet, efficient grace, his red cape a banner against the deepening twilight. He glanced over at the boy beside him, who was struggling to maintain a steady altitude. The kid, Izuku, flew with a kind of chaotic, explosive power, constantly making micro-corrections as if he were fighting gravity itself rather than commanding it. He was a rocket trying to hover. Clark was a bird hanging on the wind. There were a million questions burning in Clark's mind, questions that had been the silent companions of his entire life. But up here, in the profound quiet between worlds, they seemed secondary to the simple, overwhelming fact of the other boy's existence. He wasn't alone. The word was a revelation, a prayer answered. He caught Izuku's eye, a maelstrom of emerald-green confusion and awe. Clark offered a small, reassuring smile and gestured with his head towards the planet's northern pole, a vast, empty expanse of white. Down there. We can talk. Izuku, his mind still trying to process the last 10 minutes of his life, from his mother's frantic sewing to pushing a satellite in near orbit, gave a shaky, jerky nod. The nonverbal communication was instinctual, a shared language that transcended human speech. He followed Clark's lead, his descent a barely controlled plummet that smoothed out as he mimicked the man's posture. They landed in the heart of the Arctic, a desolate kingdom of ice and silence. The only sounds were the whisper of the polar wind and the soft crunch of their boots on the ancient snow. The sky above was a light show of ethereal greens and violets, the aurora borealis dancing as if to welcome them. They stood facing each other for a long moment, the sheer absurdity of the situation hanging in the frigid air. A farmer's son from Kansas and a student from Muzutafu, standing on top of the world, dressed in a work uniform and a gym tracksuit, united by a power that defied all known laws. Clark broke the silence first, his voice warm despite the cold, his English words forming soft clouds of condensation. Hi. I'm Clark. Izuku stared, his analytical brain kicking into overdrive but his mouth refusing to cooperate. He understood the sounds, the structure. It was the English he'd studied, but the context was so immense. His reply came out in his native tongue, a flustered, stammering torrent of Japanese. Iboku wa midoriya Izuku desu. Anata wa sono mu no shinboru, watashi no tonai tairu. Anata mo. I am Izuku midoriya. You, that symbol on your chest, it's like mine. Are you also? Clark blinked, not understanding a word but catching the desperate, questioning tone. He saw Izuku's wide eyes flick from the S on his chest to the diamond crest on Izuku's own. The boy was pointing, connecting the dots, his mind clearly moving at a superhuman pace. A slow smile spread across Clark's face. This was just another problem to be solved. He closed his eyes, focusing his super hearing not on the sound of Izuku's words, but on the intricate patterns within them. He listened to the rise and fall of his tone, the vibration of his vocal cords, the subtle clicks and shapes his mouth made. He cross-referenced it with the flood of Japanese media he could hear at that very moment, news broadcasts from Tokyo, pop songs, conversations on the street. His Kryptonian brain, a biological supercomputer, began to build a matrix. Vowels connected to emotional states. Consonants formed the bedrock of concepts. Repetitive sounds became core words. Boku. Watashi. I, me. Anata. You. Shinboru. Symbol. Izuku watched, fascinated, as the man's expression shifted from confusion to intense concentration, then to dawning comprehension. He was learning. He was learning Japanese in real time, just by listening. Izuku, realizing what was happening, felt a jolt of inspiration. He could do that too. He focused on Clark's next words, not just hearing them, but dissecting them. My name, Clark said slowly, pointing to himself, is Clark. What did you say your name was? Izuku's eyes widened. He heard the sounds, but he also perceived the underlying structure, the syntax, the simple subject-verb-object flow. He processed it, compared it to the years of textbook English in his memory, and the language clicked into place with the satisfying finality of a lock's tumbler. Midoriya. Izuku, he replied, his English hesitant but clear. He pointed to himself. I am Izuku. Clark's smile widened into a full, brilliant grin that seemed to warm the very air around them. Izuku. It's good to meet you. For Izuku, the relief was so profound it almost buckled his knees. He wasn't just a freak of nature. He wasn't an anomaly. He was standing in front of another person who was like him. The loneliness he had carried like a physical weight his entire life began to evaporate into the polar wind. But his analytical mind, his defining trait, could not be silenced. It was his anchor in the sea of madness. He fumbled inside his tracksuit, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline, and pulled out his constant companion, his notebook, miraculously unharmed, and a pen. Clark watched, bemused, as the boy flipped to a clean page, his hand shaking slightly, and began to sketch. He drew the S crest from Clark's chest with near-perfect accuracy. Next to it, he drew his own 8-pointed diamond. He underlined them both, then drew an arrow connecting them, followed by a large, emphatic question mark. My ship, Clark began, the word feeling strange on his tongue. The people who sent me here, they called me Kal-El. Izuku's head snapped up from his notebook, his pen frozen in midair. The name resonated deep in his bones, a word he knew from the deepest, most dormant part of his memory. He swallowed hard. My pod, he whispered, the English words coming more easily now. The data files, they call me Izuku L. The single syllable hung between them, a bridge across space and time. Clark took a half step forward, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Izuku's notebook slipped from his numb fingers, falling unnoticed into the snow. L. The name of their house. The name of their family. I thought I was the only one, Clark breathed, his voice thick with a lifetime of solitude. Me too, Izuku whispered back, tears freezing on his eyelashes. They were strangers, from opposite sides of the world, raised in wildly different cultures. But in that moment, under the dancing lights of the aurora, they were not Clark Kent and Izuku Midoriya. They were Kal-El and Izuku-El. They were family. They were the last. There's more, Clark said after a long, silent moment of shared understanding. Something I found a few years ago. Something that might have answers. He turned and began to walk, his long strides confident and purposeful. Izuku, after retrieving his precious notebook, hurried to keep up. They walked for what felt like miles across the featureless ice shelf until Clark stopped before a towering wall of glacial ice, indistinguishable from the rest of the landscape. Clark reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a crystalline object, about the size of his hand, that pulsed with a soft inner light. It was the command key from his ship. He pressed it against the wall of ice. There was a low hum, a deep, resonant frequency that vibrated through the ground. The ice in front of them began to glow, and then, with impossible geometry, it folded away, revealing a dark tunnel lined with a strange, black metal that seemed to drink the light. Izuku stared, his analytical mind captivated. Isotropic metamaterial? He muttered to himself. Self-replicating crystalline alloy? The energy signature is off the charts. Clark simply smiled. I call it the Fortress of Solitude. He led Izuku inside. The tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. In the center, half buried in the ice, was the source of it all, a Kryptonian scout ship, its dark hull emblazoned with the familiar S crest. The air hummed with dormant power. Consoles and holographic projectors stood silent, waiting. This is what brought me to Earth, Clark explained. I've been trying to activate its systems for years, but I could only ever get basic functions. As if on cue, as Izuku stepped fully into the chamber, the ship came to life. A soft, melodic chime echoed through the cavern. Lines of light traced paths across the floor, converging on a central dais. The main holographic projector flared, and a column of pure white light shot up to the ceiling. Within the light, a form began to coalesce. It was a man, tall and regal, with a noble face and eyes that held an ancient sadness. He was made of light and data, a ghost in the machine. Izuku froze, every Kryptonian instinct he had suppressed for 15 years screaming in recognition. Clark stood in stunned silence. He had never seen this before. The hologram's eyes, soft and luminous, found Clark first. The voice that spoke was not a recording. It was intelligent, aware, and filled with a father's love and sorrow. Kal-El, my son? You are grown. Clark's breath hitched. He couldn't speak. He could only stare at the spectral image of the father he had never known. Then, the hologram's gaze shifted to Izuku. His expression flickered with surprise, a ghost of data processing an impossible reality. And Izuku-El, son of my brother Zor-El. By all the stars, two of you survived. The hologram seemed to steady itself, its form solidifying. I am Jor-El. A preserved consciousness of your father Kal-El. And your uncle Izuku-El. Welcome to the Fortress of Solitude. Welcome to the memory of Krypton. For the next hour, Jor-El told them the story. The hologram shifted and changed, projecting images onto the cavern walls. They saw Krypton in its glory, a planet of breathtaking crystalline cities, of thinkers and artists, of a civilization that had mastered science but had lost touch with nature. They saw its great red sun, Rao, a benevolent, life-giving star. Then, they saw the end. Jor-El showed them the data, the seismic readings, the undeniable proof of their planet's unstable core. He showed them the Kryptonian Council, proud and stubborn, dismissing his warnings as alarmism. We were a people of great intellect, but little wisdom, Jor-El's voice lamented, echoing with the sorrow of a billion souls. We looked to the stars, but we failed to see the danger beneath our own feet. In our arrogance, we believed we were eternal. He showed them the final, desperate hours. Two brothers, Jor-El and Zor-El, working in secret, building two tiny arks for their sons. They saw a hologram of a woman with kind eyes and dark hair, Lara, Clark's mother. And then another, a woman with a scientist's fierce gaze and a gentle smile, Alara, Izuku's mother. We could not save our world, Jor-El continued, his voice heavy with the weight of his failure. We could only save its future. We sent you to Earth, a planet with a developing species, orbiting a young yellow sun. A sun that would grant you powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. The final image he showed them was the most painful, a view from their departing pods, of Krypton, their home, their entire world, shattering in a silent, cataclysmic explosion of light and energy. You are the last, Jor-El said, his form turning to face them both, his eyes filled with a terrible burden. You are all that is left of Krypton. Its memory, its legacy, its hope, it rests with you. The hologram faded, leaving the two cousins standing in the echoing silence of the ship, the ghosts of their dead world surrounding them. They were no longer just two boys who had met under strange circumstances. They were the inheritors of a fallen kingdom, the bearers of an impossible legacy. They were brothers, bound by blood and tragedy. They sat on a cold, metal ledge of the scout ship, the weight of their shared history settling over them. For a long time, neither spoke. What was there to say? Their entire understanding of themselves had been erased and rewritten. Izuku finally broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper. All my life, I thought I was a mistake. A quirkless defect in a world of powers. I was hiding what I was, pretending to be weak, because I was scared. He looked at his hands. I had all this strength, and I never used it. Not until today. I was hiding too, Clark admitted, his voice low. My parents taught me to be careful. They were afraid of what people would do if they found out. I only ever helped people in secret. Today was the first time I didn't hold back. The first time the world saw me. He looked at Izuku, a new, serious light in his eyes. And now the world has seen both of us. Things are going to change. We have a responsibility, Izuku. To use these gifts, to honor the world we lost by protecting the one we found. I know, Izuku said, nodding fervently. That's all I've ever wanted. To be a hero. To save people with a smile, like All Might. Clark tilted his head. All Might? He's the #1 hero in Japan. The symbol of peace. Izuku's voice took on its familiar, analytical, fanboyish energy, a spark of the old him returning. He's saved millions. His work has inspired a whole generation of heroes and lowered the crime rate too. A hero? Clark interrupted, a note of confusion in his voice. You mean, it's a job? A profession? Of course. Izuku said, surprised. You have to get a license from the Hero Public Safety Commission. You go to a special high school, like UA, where they teach you everything, rescue techniques, combat training, ethics, hero law. He trailed off as he saw the look on Clark's face. It was one of genuine, profound bewilderment. A school? Clark repeated slowly, as if testing the word. You need to go to a school to learn how to be a hero? You need a license, to save someone? The first fissure in their newfound brotherhood appeared. Well, yes, Izuku said, suddenly on the defensive. Of course you do. It's not just about being strong. It's about control. It's about minimizing collateral damage, working with the police, and coordinating with other heroes during a large-scale disaster. Untrained people with powers, they're called vigilantes. They're illegal. They cause more harm than good. But we're not just people with powers, Clark argued, standing up and beginning to pace. Look at what we did today. We stopped a satellite from destroying 2 countries. No school can teach you that. We have a global responsibility. We can hear cries for help from the other side of the planet. Why would we limit ourselves to one city? Why would we get tangled up in bureaucracy and regulations when someone's life is on the line? His perspective, shaped by the wide-open spaces of Kansas and a lifetime of self-reliance, was fundamentally at odds with Izuku's. If a building is collapsing in a country with no heroes, Clark pressed, his voice filled with earnest conviction, do we wait for permission to act? If a tidal wave is about to hit a coastline, do we check if we're legally allowed to intervene? The world is our city, Izuku. We don't need a license. We just need to act. Izuku stood up too, his own conviction flaring. He was no longer the stammering, overwhelmed boy. He was speaking from the core of his beliefs, beliefs that had been his guiding star through years of darkness. Acting without thinking is what villains do. He shot back, his voice ringing with passion. What if we make a mistake? What if, in stopping that tidal wave, you accidentally cause an earthquake? What if, in saving one building, you destabilize the foundations of the ones next to it? Hero work is a science. It requires study, and practice, and teamwork. All Might is the greatest because he has strength, yes, but he also has the experience and training to use it wisely. He knows how to save people, not just that he should. He jabbed a finger at his own chest. I want to go to UA High. I want to learn from the best. I want to learn how to use this Kryptonian power, responsibly. I want to earn people's trust, not just demand it because I'm strong. I want to be a symbol they can believe in, not a force of nature they have to fear. They stood facing each other, two sides of the same Kryptonian coin. Clark, the global guardian, believing in a pure, untethered morality. Izuku, the systematic hero, believing in structure, training, and the power of a collective. It was the conflict between the individual and the institution, between raw power and refined skill. Clark looked at his cousin, at the fierce, unyielding idealism burning in his emerald eyes. He didn't agree. He couldn't comprehend wanting to put a leash on a miracle, but he could respect the conviction behind it. He saw that Izuku's path was not born of fear, but of a different kind of courage, the courage to seek wisdom, not just wield power. A slow smile touched Clark's lips. A school. To learn how to be a hero. He let out a soft chuckle, a sound of wonder rather than mockery. Okay, Izuku. I don't understand it. But it's your life, your choice. He extended his hand. We'll walk different paths. But we're walking them together. We're brothers. No matter what. Izuku looked at the offered hand, then at his cousin's open, honest face. He took it, his grip firm. Brothers. The ideological divide remained, a chasm between their worldviews. But their hands, clasped in the heart of their shared history, formed a bridge across it. One would become a symbol for the world, a god who walked among them. The other would strive to become a hero within a system, a student among his peers. Two paths. Two heroes. One legacy. The story of the House of El on Earth was about to truly begin. The 10 months that followed the satellite incident were the most grueling, paradoxical, and transformative of Izuku Midoriya's life. He was a being who could crack a mountain in half, yet his training consisted of learning how not to break a teacup. He was mentored by the symbol of peace, All Might, but the lessons were not about power, they were about restraint. The goal was not to make him stronger, but to make him smaller, to teach a god how to walk convincingly in the shoes of a man. Their training ground was the Goba Municipal Beach Park, a stretch of coastline that had become an illegal dumping ground over the years. It was a mournful scrapyard of rusted appliances, mountains of forgotten trash, and the ghosts of discarded dreams. For All Might, it had been the perfect place to train a successor for One for All, a physical trial of strength and endurance. For Izuku, it was a classroom for control. All right, young Midoriya. Toshinori Yagi announced on their first day, his voice a reedy version of his heroic boom. He pointed a skeletal finger at a massive, rust-eaten industrial freezer half buried in the sand. Your task is simple. Lift it. Izuku blinked. Just lift it, Toshinori confirmed, and place it on top of that flatbed truck over there. But here is the challenge. He produced a small, fragile-looking bird's egg from his pocket. You must do it without so much as a hairline crack appearing on this. He carefully placed the egg on a relatively flat, rusted spot on top of the freezer. Izuku stared at the multi-ton wreck, then at the delicate, speckled egg. He understood immediately. This wasn't a test of strength. It was a test of finesse. Anyone with a decent strength quirk could have hoisted the freezer. But to do so with such absolute, uniform control that the G-forces didn't crush a simple egg? That was a different problem entirely. He took a deep breath, centering himself. He crouched, his fingers finding purchase on the cold, corroded metal. He pushed aside the instinct to just heave it. Instead, he spread his power, imagining it not as a punch, but as a gentle, rising tide. He focused, feeling every loose bolt, every weak point, every shift in the freezer's center of gravity. He straightened his legs, the motion so impossibly smooth that the behemoth lifted from the sand without a single grain of dirt being disturbed. It floated, silent and steady in his hands. The egg sat perfectly still. A slow, proud smile touched Toshinori's lips. Good. Very good. Now do that with the rest of the beach. Day after day, the training continued, each task designed to hone a different aspect of his terrifying self-control. For his speed, Toshinori didn't have him race. Instead, he made Izuku walk beside him for an hour, forbidding him from breaking a perfectly normal human pace. For a boy who could circumnavigate the globe in minutes, it was an exercise in maddening restraint. For his senses, the challenge was even greater. One afternoon, Toshinori stood at the shoreline and tossed a handful of specially marked pebbles into the crashing waves. "There are 12 pebbles in my hand, young Midoriya," he said over the roar of the surf. "Your task is to identify the sound of each individual pebble as it sinks through the water, track its trajectory, and retrieve all 12 before they settle on the ocean floor, all while ignoring every other sound in the city behind you." Izuku closed his eyes, and the world dissolved into a symphony of chaos. He heard the frantic heartbeat of a salaryman running late for a train 3 miles away, the fizz of a soda being opened in a convenience store downtown, the distant cry of a child who had scraped her knee. He pushed it all away, focusing, filtering, until the world narrowed to the small patch of ocean in front of him. He heard the gentle plink as the first pebble broke the surface, the soft hiss as it displaced the water, the unique acoustic signature of it tumbling through the current. He mapped it in his mind, then the next, until he held 12 distinct sonic trails in his consciousness. A green blur shot into the water, and he emerged seconds later, soaked but triumphant, with 12 specific pebbles arranged neatly in his palm. Their conversations were just as important as the physical exercises. They would sit on a cleared section of the beach, watching the sunset paint the sky, and talk about what it truly meant to be a hero. "Your power, my boy, is absolute," Toshinori said one evening, his voice heavy. "It is a force of nature. But forces of nature are terrifying. A hurricane doesn't care who it harms. An earthquake doesn't choose its victims. You must never become a force of nature. Your humanity, Izuku, your empathy, your compassion, your hesitation to cause harm, that is your true strength. It is the anchor that will keep you from being swept away by the cosmic power flowing through your veins." He looked at Izuku, his sunken eyes filled with a desperate, paternal hope. "When you are in that exam, you will be tempted. You will see others using their flashy, destructive quirks, and you will want to show them what you can do. You will want to prove that quirkless Deku is a lie. Do not give in to that temptation. A true hero's measure is not in the power they display, but in the lives they save." During these long months, Izuku maintained his quiet, ethereal connection with Clark. It wasn't a conversation of words, but of shared feelings and faint impressions sent across the globe during the quiet hours of the night. Izuku would project his anxiety about the exam, the crushing weight of his responsibility. "I have to pretend to be so much less than what I am. It feels dishonest." From halfway across the world, a sense of calm reassurance would return, a feeling of quiet strength. Clark's impression was tinged with a fond bewilderment. "A test? To become a hero? It seems strange. But I believe in you. Show them your heart, not just your strength." That's what our parents would have wanted. That thought became Izuku's mantra. Show them your heart. By the time the 10 months were over, Dagoba Beach was pristine, its sands gleaming in the morning sun for the first time in years. And Izuku Midoriya was not stronger. He was sharper. He was a scalpel, where he had once been a sledgehammer. He was ready. The day of the UA High entrance exam arrived, a crisp, clear morning full of nervous energy. Izuku stood before the colossal gates of Japan's most prestigious hero academy, a small, unassuming figure in his junior high uniform, lost in a sea of confident teenagers showing off their quirks. One boy was casually juggling balls of fire, a girl had long, prehensile earlobes that she used to adjust her bag, another had engine-like calves that rumbled with contained power. Izuku just clutched the straps of his yellow backpack, his heart a frantic double beat in his chest. Show them your heart. The written exam was the first part, and for Izuku, it was a triviality. His Kryptonian mind absorbed and processed the information with effortless speed. He finished the grueling test in under 15 minutes, then spent the next 45 pretending to check his work, trying to mimic the furrowed brows and eraser chewing of his peers. He passed, of course. Then came the orientation in the main auditorium. The voice hero, Present Mike, was on stage, a whirlwind of leather, sunglasses, and manic energy. "Welcome, examinee listeners, to today's live performance," he screeched, the volume making the speakers buzz. "Can I get a yeah?" Silence. Izuku, notebook already out, began muttering to himself, analyzing the hero's quirk even as he explained the rules of the practical exam. Voice-based quirk, directional sound wave projection, likely requires significant breath control. What are the decibel limits before causing permanent damage? As the handout says, Present Mike continued, pointing to a slide showing 3 silhouettes of robots. You'll be running a 10-minute mock urban battle. You'll face 3 types of foe villains. Points are awarded for defeating them. 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers. Kick M to the curb. Suddenly, a tall, well-built young man with glasses stood up, his hand shooting into the air like a piston. It was the boy with the engine calves, Tenya Ida. "Excuse me, sir, I have a question," he announced, his voice booming with formal intensity. "On the printout, there are 4 types of villains, not 3. If this is a misprint, it is a gross error for Japan's top hero academy." He then swiveled, pointing a rigid finger directly at Izuku. "And you, with the curly hair. You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting and disrespectful. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave." A wave of heat washed over Izuku's face as dozens of eyes turned to him. He clamped his mouth shut, sinking in his seat. The old shame, the familiar sting of being called out for being the weirdo, flared up. But then he looked at the printout Ida was referring to. The 4th silhouette. The massive one, marked with a 0. Present Mike laughed. All right, examinee 7111, thanks for the call in. The 4th villain type is a gimmick. An obstacle. It's worth 0 points. Think of it like a thwomp from Super Mario, best to avoid it." While the rest of the auditorium processed that, Izuku's mind was racing. 0 points. An obstacle meant to be avoided. He remembered All Might's words. A true hero's measure is not in the power they display, but in the lives they save. He looked at the silhouette of the 0-pointer, and his entire strategy for the exam clicked into place. Solid and absolute. It wasn't about avoiding the obstacle. It was about what happened to the people who couldn't avoid it. Izuku found himself at the gates of Battle Center B, a sprawling, artificial cityscape. He was surrounded by the other examinees, all of them stretching and psyching themselves up. He saw the brown-haired, rosy-cheeked girl from the gate, who looked just as nervous as he felt. He saw Bakugo at a different Battle Center gate, his expression a mask of arrogant contempt. His plan was simple, and utterly insane. He would not defeat a single villain. He would not score a single villain point. His exam was not about fighting robots. It was about protecting the other applicants from them, and from themselves. He would focus exclusively on the secret metric Present Mike hadn't mentioned, the one Izuku was banking his entire future on: rescue points. And start. Present Mike's voice boomed from unseen speakers. The other examinees shot off the line, a mad dash into the city. Izuku was left standing in their dust. "What are you waiting for?" Present Mike yelled. "There's no countdown in a real fight. Go, go, go!" Izuku took one last, deep breath, silencing the hurricane of noise from the city. He didn't run. He listened. He filtered out the metallic clang of robots being destroyed, the triumphant shouts of his competitors. He listened for the things that mattered: the panicked cry of a student who was cornered, the groan of stressed metal from a collapsing pylon, the frantic heartbeat of someone in real danger. He heard it almost immediately. 2 blocks to his left. A high-pitched scream. He moved. To an outside observer, it would have looked like he simply vanished. One moment he was at the gate, the next he was gone. He didn't run along the streets. He took to the rooftops, his movements silent and fluid, a green ghost against the fake city's skyline. He arrived to see a boy with a hardening quirk trapped, his leg pinned by the wreckage of a 1-point robot he had just destroyed. Another 2-pointer was bearing down on him, its single red eye glowing menacingly. Izuku didn't hesitate. He dropped from the roof, landing as softly as a cat. The world slowed to a crawl around him. He could see the trajectory of the robot's laser cannon, the fear in the trapped boy's eyes, the precise point of structural failure in the robot's leg joint. He moved in a blur. He didn't punch the two-pointer. A punch would have vaporized it, sending shrapnel flying everywhere. That was the old way. All Might's training had taught him a better way. His hands became a whirlwind of surgical precision. In the space of half a second, he located the robot's external power pack and disconnected it with a clean jerk. He found the access panel for its primary motor functions and, with fingers that moved faster than the eye could see, unscrewed the 4 bolts holding it in place, pulling out the main CPU. The two-pointer froze mid-stride, its red eye dimming. It listed to one side and collapsed into a harmless pile of scrap metal with a quiet clank. Izuku then turned to the trapped boy, lifted the multi-ton piece of wreckage with one hand as if it were cardboard, and helped him to his feet. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked, his voice calm. The boy stared, his mouth agape, looking from the perfectly disassembled robot to Izuku, who was already turning to leave. How did you? Be careful." Izuku called back, already leaping back to the rooftops, leaving the boy in a state of stunned confusion. 0 villain points, Izuku thought. But 1 potential rescue point assist. He spent the next several minutes as a guardian angel of the battlefield. He didn't engage a single robot directly. Instead, he shadowed the other examinees. When a girl with a tail quirk was about to be ambushed from behind, a stray piece of rubble, thrown from an unseen source, knocked the robot off balance, giving her the opening she needed. When a group was overwhelmed in a narrow alley, a massive dumpster inexplicably slid across the entrance, providing them with a perfect defensive barrier. He was a phantom, a whisper of assistance. He dismantled robots that had trapped people, cleared debris from escape paths, and deflected attacks that would have hit an applicant's blind spot. He was everywhere and nowhere, a green flash in the periphery. His score in the official metric remained a perfect, resounding 0. But in the unofficial calculus of heroism, he was racking up a fortune. Then, the ground began to shake. A deep, grinding roar echoed through the artificial city, and from behind a skyscraper, the 0-pointer rose. It was a titan, a monster of green metal and black pistons, towering over the tallest buildings. Its single, massive hand could have crushed a bus. The other examinees, who had been fighting with such bravado, froze in collective terror. The 0-pointer. It's huge. It's not worth any points. We have to run. Everyone, get back. A wave of panic sent the applicants scrambling away from the mechanical behemoth. It was the smart move, the logical one. But heroism is so often illogical. As the crowd fled, Izuku heard a small, pained cry. It was the friendly, brown-haired girl. She had tripped, and a large chunk of concrete had pinned her leg. She was lying directly in the path of the advancing 0-pointer. Izuku saw it all in an instant, the girl's terrified face, the massive shadow falling over her, the other students running for their lives. His mind went utterly silent. There were no more calculations, no more strategies. No more thoughts of points or passing or failing. There was only a person who needed saving. He remembered All Might's voice. A true hero's measure is not in the power they display, but in the lives they save. He also remembered Clark's simple, heartfelt message, show them your heart. This was it. While everyone else ran away, Izuku ran towards the danger. He burst from an alleyway, his feet barely touching the ground. He had to disable the robot, not destroy it. A punch would be catastrophic, a city block leveling explosion of shrapnel that would endanger everyone, including the girl. He needed a surgical strike. He bent his knees and leaped. He didn't just jump, he flew. For the first time in his life, in public, he let go of the gravity that had bound him. He shot into the sky, a silent green rocket, soaring towards the robot's colossal head. The wind roared past his ears. The world below became a map. He saw the panicked faces of the other students looking up, their expressions of terror turning to utter disbelief. He saw Tenya Ida stop in his tracks, his jaw hanging open. He saw the brown-haired girl stare up at him, her eyes wide with wonder. He engaged his vision, peeling back the layers of the robot's armored plating. He saw the complex machinery within, the hydraulics, the wiring, the central processing unit. But his target was more fundamental. He followed the primary power cables down the robot's torso, down its leg, to the massive ankle joint. There, nestled deep within the machinery, was the primary hydraulic actuator, and the main power conduit for the entire right leg. There, he didn't use heat vision as a weapon. He used it as a tool. A beam of intense, focused heat, no thicker than a needle, shot from his eyes. It was invisible to the naked eye, a pure, precise lance of thermal energy. It bypassed the armor, slicing cleanly through the power conduit, and severing the main hydraulic line in the same microsecond. The effect was instantaneous and surgically precise. The zero-pointer's right leg seized up. Its advance stopped dead. The colossal machine, its balance thrown completely off by the sudden paralysis of one leg, teetered for a horrifying moment. Then, with a groan of protesting metal that echoed like the fall of a titan, it began to topple over, backwards, away from the trapped girl, crashing into an empty building far behind it. Izuku landed in front of the girl as softly as a falling leaf. The ground shuddered from the robot's impact, but the danger was over. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice miraculously steady. The girl, Achiko Uraraka, could only stare at him, speechless. He turned and, with one hand, lifted the slab of concrete pinning her ankle. It might as well have been a piece of foam. "Your ankle might be sprained," he said, his analytical mind reasserting itself. "You should stay off it." Buzz. "Time's up." Present Mick's voice blared, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku stood up, his body trembling, not from exertion, but from the sheer, terrifying release of his power. He had done it. He had saved her. He had shown them his heart. He had also scored 0 villain points. He looked around at the smoking wreckage, the other students staring at him with a mixture of awe and fear. He had a sinking feeling he had just failed the entrance exam for his dream school. In a darkened observation room high above the battle centers, the faculty of UA High had been watching the entire spectacle. "Well, that's a wrap," President Mike said, leaning back in his chair. "Some real promising candidates this year. That kid with the explosions is a powerhouse, and the one with the engines has great fundamentals." "Indeed," said the R-rated hero Midnight. "But did you see that last-minute save in Battle Center B? Talk about a showstopper." On the main monitor, a grim-faced, tired-looking man in a black jumpsuit replayed the footage of the zero-pointer incident. Shota Aizawa, also known as the Erasure Hero, Eraserhead, narrowed his eyes. "Rewind it," he commanded in a monotone voice. Frame by frame. The ascent. The footage crawled forward. They saw Izuku leap, his body accelerating at a rate that defied physics. "There's no visible quirk factor," Aizawa noted, his eyes scanning the data readouts. "No energy discharge, no physical mutation. He just goes up. The force required for that launch should have shattered the pavement, but the ground is barely cracked." He skipped forward to the robot's collapse. "And the disable. There's no impact point. No external damage. It's as if the machine's leg just decided to stop working. This isn't a quirk. Quirks are biological phenomena. They have Tell's energy signatures. This is a walking, talking violation of the laws of physics." He turned to the other teachers, his expression dark. "He's not a promising candidate. He's a liability. An unknown quantity with uncontrollable, illogical power. He's too dangerous." A cheerful, high-pitched voice cut through the tension. "Or it said, he is the most fascinating educational puzzle I have ever seen." Principal Nizu, an animal with a rare quirk that gave him superintelligence, hopped onto the console, a wide, unnerving smile on his furry face. "Aizawa-kun, you are looking at the problem with the eyes of a tactician," Nizu said, pouring himself a cup of tea. "Look at it with the eyes of an educator." The boy displayed 0 offensive maneuvers. His every action was calculated to mitigate risk and ensure the safety of his fellow examinees. He pressed a button on the console, and a new scoring metric appeared on the screen. It was labeled Rescue Points. "Hero work isn't just about smashing villains, after all," Nizu chirped. "It's about saving people. We award points for acts of altruism, displays of heroic spirit, and direct intervention to save others from harm." The screen populated with scores. Most students had a handful of rescue points, 5, 10, maybe 15. Then, the camera feed zoomed in on Izuku's name. The number next to it climbed rapidly as a silent supercut of his actions played, clearing debris, disarming a robot to free a trapped applicant, shielding others from an attack, and finally, his takedown of the zero-pointer and rescue of Achiko Uraraka. The final score locked in. Examinee 2234, Midoriya Izuku. Villain points 0, rescue points 120. The room fell silent. 120. It was a score so astronomically high it broke the entire system. He had more than doubled the previous all-time record. Aizawa stared at the number, his logical, pragmatic world tilting on its axis. The boy had a plan. A ridiculous, reckless, impossibly altruistic plan. It wasn't the act of an uncontrollable monster. It was the act of a true hero. A terrifyingly powerful one. Mizu sipped his tea, his beady eyes gleaming with delight. 0 villain points, and the highest score in the history of this academy. A perfect contradiction. His application file lists him as quirkless, yet he displays power that rivals All Might. Oh, this is simply wonderful. The data he will provide will be revolutionary. He turned his cheerful, slightly manic grin to the rest of the faculty. Well, I think the results are clear. We have a new student. Let's see what happens when we try to teach a miracle.